I am TJ Denzer, Senior News Editor for Shacknews, joined here by producer Michael Murray and Tekken Game Director and producer Katsuhiro Harada-san. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. I have been a huge fan of the franchise since I was in single digits when the first games came out. So I've been playing my whole life. And we are on the precipice of Tekken 8. And I just want to start out by asking, new engine for this game.
V5, yeah.
And we see, in the recent trailer for Martial Law, so expressive, so much of the Bruce Lee influence in there, in the faces. It's so amazing. And how fun has it been to build the game from the ground up in this new engine?
So like you were saying, I mean, we were building all the assets from scratch. So it's very challenging because you have to recreate this IP that everyone loves, and we have to make sure that we recreate the part that they all love about it. You know, that's not just the gameplay; that's the way that the look and feel of the game, not just the characters, but the atmosphere, the stages, everything. And to do all that from scratch, and even when you say a character model, it's not just that; it's the character and the rigging and the muscles and all of that, and the facial on top of it, like you were mentioning. And to have all of that recreated in the game and look even way better than what we've done in the past. And he was mentioning, and me too, that take Jin Kazama for one example, that all of the people, most of the people who are on the team have been at it for 20 years or so, and to say, okay, we're going to remake Jin, so do it and let's see how it goes. And the first one that they make doesn't really look like Jin Kazama. So even all the people who are used to it are tweaking little fine details here and there, because he was saying that what you're able to do now, the level of detail, not just the resolution, but the character model, the bones and the structure and everything, is so complex and in detail that just making the slightest changes everything. And to get it just right is so difficult. And even the lighting on the character models, everything influences how the game finally looks. And so to recreate it from scratch and to make it look better than before was quite a challenge, both resources, time, and money. So
at the core of this, the gameplay elements here, you have the new heat system, which is both its own beast and kind of like an amalgam of different working features from previous Tekken games. One of the priorities in that has been enhancing character speciality and characteristics. With the introduction of the heat system, can you go into a little bit of detail as to building those specialities for each character and making sure that each character isn't underpowered or overpowered in the new system?
as you say, I mean, Tekken is a game that's played on a competitive scene, and it's something that's very important. But more important than thinking of that from the start is whether it's fun, entertaining, enthralling, etc. So that actually should come to the forefront. You know, is it just the fine details of the character uniqueness and things like that? Does it feel good, like that you actually beat down your opponent, or whatever makes the game mechanic in particular feel good? Is that present? Because that needs to be there, and then you can think of whether it's balanced or strong or weak later. Because it can be a little bit weak, etc. People, as long as it's really fun to do, then people will stick with it. So we think of that the most at the first, and then towards the end, you kind of tailor it so that it's okay from the competitive side of it. And I would just add that I think the heat system is quite new this time. It's something we haven't really had in Tekken. I mean, I think a lot of people compare it to Rage because you had Rage Arts or Rage Drive, but Rage, you have to have only a little bit of health, right? And then you can go into Rage. But this time for the heat system, you can use it at any time during the round, which is a big change, I think, from a gameplay standpoint. So I don't see it as building on something we've done before. It's something that's totally new from my perspective.
It's such an interesting thing too, because from a strategic standpoint, you lose the heat gauge once you use it.
So once you have the heat, like you said, once per round, when you do some things, it goes away all the way, right? So basically you have this gauge that counts down depending on what you do. So if you're doing like a heat smash, that's going to take it all at once. Mm-hmm. There's certain moves that drain it a little bit faster. And then, for example, if your opponent's on the ground and you're down, then it doesn't drain it all and you keep it. or some characters like King, he has a thing where if he uses certain throws, he can actually increase it.
Yeah.
So it's not as simple as it. If you do something, it goes away. Like you can even do maybe a heat dash, and some of it goes away, but you still have enough for a heat smash, etc. So yeah, it really depends on what you're doing at that time.
For sure. And like you'll have players that like use it right out of the gate,
Right.
or players that hold on to it maybe until they get down to that rage state and then bust it out as like the last ditch effort. And I think it makes for such an interesting and new wrinkle to what we've been playing in Tekken for years.
Exactly. It gives the player so many options and lets them tailor it to their playstyle.
And getting back to characters, like this franchise has so many characters at this point. It's so difficult to decide on like like let's just jump into it. How do you even begin to sift through who makes the cut for a day one roster versus who gets held back for DLC perhaps?
ざっと数えただけで70以上ちょっといるからでこれは
So yeah, we've never really counted, but we can easily say there's over probably 70 some characters in the franchise up to date. So if you think about that, if we were even able to put all of them in at once at the start, is that really something that the players would want? Maybe not, because it's quite hard for you to find one of those 70 that you want to play, but even more so, that means that your opponent's going to be picking from 70 of those characters, right? So you have to learn how to defeat all of those different characters. And so it's difficult from that perspective, but also from a creator's perspective. We could probably say that Tekken is maybe the most expensive to create one character because it's a 3D fighting game, so you have to be able to look at the character from any angle possible. Plus, they have 80 to 100 moves per character. Not just that, the effects that we have are very detailed and to have unique ones for each character. And then also, if you look at the customization, where a lot of games might have a skin, right? Where ours are individually customized, with the head, body, the pants, etc. All these different things that you have to create for just one character make it very expensive. So there's that as well. So then, when you take all of that into account, then when do you want to release the game? Because if we had 10 years to work on it, perhaps we could make all the characters. All of those things kind of come together to decide how many characters we can start with. And then you have to choose, like you said, who do you start with in that roster? And then when you're thinking of that, there's a variety of different things that come into play. There's fan favorites. So the character that most people are using from a perspective of how often, and even not just use, but how much do people like them, how much they like to see them in the movies, or how much they like to see them in the scene in general. Then there's also not just that, but from a marketing perspective, like there's different regions around the world where we want to sell the game in, and does that appeal to that particular group, or does it represent a certain group? And maybe we're adding a new character to represent a certain area as well. So all of these things kind of come into decide the starting lineup, and it's quite difficult, as you can imagine.
And with the heat system, now you've got to design a rage art, a heat crush, and specifics for each character. You've made so much work for yourselves.
Yeah, it's like you said, and those are kind of unique. So, I mean, it's common across the characters, and then you have unique animations for each. But even more so, like, what kind of new way to play the character do you have in the heat state, like we were mentioning? That is even more for each character the game designers have to work on. So, but it greatly improves the experience for the fans. So I think it's something that everyone's going to love.
Absolutely. And crossover and guest characters were such a huge part of Tekken 7. Like, there was to the point where, like, EVO 2022 saw a Geese Howard player in the Final 8 as well as Akuma. Like, I have to wonder, with that level of participation from those guest characters, can we see a similar level of dedication in Tekken 8?
So for Tekken 7, we announced Akuma fairly early on, and he was implemented into the storyline, etc. So that's actually a very rare case where a guest character is thought of in the game that early on from our side. And as we mentioned, the heat system and all the unique elements of that tailored to each character and the characters themselves having totally new costumes and looks and feels, ways of playing them, etc. With even just the ones we've shown so far, and then if you think the ones we haven't shown, or maybe even if we want to create a new character, etc. There's so much that we want to do with Tekken to make it a fully fleshed experience with the Tekken characters that it's not nearly the time to think about guest characters.
Tekken 7 came out in 2017, that's right.
For console, yeah.
And it had such a long lifespan in both just support and competition. Can fans expect a similar lifespan and support for Tekken 8?
Yeah, that's an interesting conversation that, as you mentioned, Tekken 7 has been going on for so long from the player base and for us supporting it. We started off with the rough ideas of the DLC for Season 1, and that was about it. That's how the market was as well at the time. But then as we were playing it, or we were making the game and people were still playing it and they wanted more and more, then we were like, okay, I guess we'll make a Season 2. We announced that, and then we were like, you still want to play the game? Okay, maybe we'll 3, 4, and 5, and it went on and on. And it's kind of hard to say. I mean, we really want Tekken 8 to be as successful or more and to continue. But at the same time, developing games, Harada said he kind of planned to start on 8 earlier because, when you think about the lifespan, or not just the lifespan, but the amount of time that you have to work on a game until you retire is finite, and he would want to work on more games, right, rather than one for a very long time. So it's tough because you want the game to be loved by everyone for a long time, but at the same time you want to make more games. So yeah, I totally agree with him. I think I think Tekken 8. We have a huge player base now because of Tekken 7. And I think the new mechanics of Tekken 8 is really outstanding, and the uniqueness of each character and the amount of time you can spend exploring the game is really going to stand out. So I feel that it has just as much, if not more, potential than Tekken 7.